Hello, I'm Meredith Blackwell, and I'm at the International Mycological Congress in Maastricht. It's number 12, and it is August the 14th, 2024. And I'm here with François Lutzoni, who is going to tell us something about his life, his early life, how he became interested in fungi, and then his career. And I should say that I've known François since he was a kid, before he got his PhD. And one of the first times I was invited to speak at a university, it was because François invited me to come to Duke when he was a student. So I was always felt very warm toward François. So François, begin.
Thank you, Meredith. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. And also I have fond memories of that visit. It was such a big deal for us, to host you.
And me.
And it was so nice. And I remember also very fondly when we visited you at LSU, and you so kindly hosted us at your home.
And I want to point out one thing, because it'll get us back to where you're from. But I remember I picked you up in Lafayette, Louisiana. We went across what's called the Atchafalaya Spillway, and you saw a town in Louisiana that's called Maringouin. And you were very excited because apparently the French in Louisiana and the French in Canada didn't ever pick up a newer name for mosquito. And Maringouin means mosquito.
Yep.
So,
and it was like, yes, it's like I felt at home in a way.
Do you remember that? You remember?
Yeah, totally. And I remember also when we went to see a Cajun band playing.
Yep.
And I was able to speak French with them after. It was very special.
I was going to say, at another international mycological congress in Australia, I was in a restaurant and I heard a young man speaking, and I turned around to see if it was you. And it wasn't, but it turned out he was French Canadian.
Yeah.
And I recognized the accent, I guess. And you were the only one I knew with it. Okay, so enough of that. Let's talk mycology.
Well, that's who I am, right? I'm from Quebec. I was born near Montreal, and my path to mycology is very unusual, very, very unusual, and very long. And I think it's good to mention this to some young undergrads when I talk to them who feel that they are behind and they feel like they have to go into a career very quickly. And so I tell them my story, which is basically from a very young age, I was always very interested in natural sciences. And there was nothing else really, to the point where in high school, I remember they would have these questionnaires to determine which track, research, or not research, but academic track or school should you go through, and fields of interest, and I remember filling this long questionnaires of all kinds of different interests possible, and the person who was doing this after said, well, you're interested in nothing except nature. You seem to be, that's the only thing that is. So he said, well, there is a wildlife management it's a technical school for wildlife management, and it seemed that it would be perfect. And I said, well, yeah, that sounds great. So I asked him more about this. He said, well, it's the 3-year program. The only thing is that when you do this, you will be able to go in the field. You will be all, learn botany, entomology, everything, right? It's all about nature and, bird migrations, fish population, whatever, right? So wildlife management, but it's a technical training, so it means you have a job after this, and you cannot go to university unless you take more courses. I said, okay, that's perfect, sounds great. And it was located outside of Montreal, so it was pretty far along the St. Lawrence River, and I was happy about that too, because it was a beautiful place along the St. Lawrence River. It's called La Pocatière. And then so I went there. I was 17 when I went there, and it was the best experience possible. It was just so good. And I got a position after that. A few months after I finished, I was lucky to get a position in a university, a French-Canadian university, Université Laval, near Quebec City. And so, and I was working in a lab, a research lab by Miroslav Grantner, their research was vegetation, plant communities in relation with soil. And my job as a technician was to help the PhD students and master students in his lab to do the work in the field. So for me, it's like, I couldn't believe it because I was like, I cannot believe that I'm even paid to do this because I would do it for free, going to these places who are now, in those days they were not, but now they're national parks, Canadian national parks. Mm-hmm. And so, so I did this for 11 years. So I was a technician for 11 years, but through that process, what I did was to also take courses first to be able to be applying to the university level to do a bachelor degree. And I was doing this at night because I was working full time. And then after that, I was able to start my bachelor degree, which was in agronomy because the plant and soil sciences, which I knew at that time were my passion. It was clear that it was not zoology or other things like this, but really plant and soil sciences was very attractive to me. So agronomy was better than biology for this, so that's why I went there, and that's a 4-year program. And it took me 5 years because I was taking these courses while I was working. So I always thank very much the Grantner because he let me do this while I was working. And then after those 5 years, then I wanted to start a master's degree. But also, I must say, just when I started, and that's where my first kind of contact with mycology was. So my first interest through my training in my technical training was plants. So plant systematics, plant collections. I really loved that, and it was clear that's where I was going. But it was driven more by an ecological interest, so I was really more interested in plant communities and things like this. But to do this, to me at least, it looked like I need to know my plants really well. And I was starting to be pretty comfortable doing this because I was doing a lot of that. And so I thought, well, now I need to go to the next group, which would be mosses, because I was not so familiar with them, and lichens. And I had the opportunity during that summer, just before starting working, to have training by someone who trained me to start, identifying mosses and lichens. And lichens really piqued my attention. I really felt like this was really fascinating, and how poorly known they were, and how difficult that was to identify compared to plants. And so when I started at Université Laval, within the first, I think, 2 months of my job, the first thing that happened was that Ernie Brodo, who wrote the book of the Lichens of North America, was coming to give a graduate course. And my boss was telling me that me will be assisting him for this course. So I asked if I could take the course at the same time as I was helping. And he said, sure, you can do it. And this is my first course at the university level, was lichenology taught by Ernie Brodo. And it was amazing. So I was, I did that. And through the process, what happened is that when we were doing with these graduate students, going in the field, doing this work, of mapping the vegetation and also soil, is that we were working in some pretty alpine areas. For instance, Mont-Albert was one of them, but also in other places in north that a lot of the vegetation is lichens. And so the students usually were not so interested in identifying this material. So quickly it became that this would be my job, that I was not only collecting them, in these quadrats for ecological studies, but my job was to identify them. And through that process, I was, becoming more and more interested in this. And then I remember accumulating these boxes of very challenging material that then I would have the permission to go to Ottawa with Ernie Brodo to help me solve the most difficult material.
Let me just ask you, do you want to say something about Ernie Brodo, just so that we have an extra mycologist in the interview?
Well, it's nice that you ask.
And is this the book that he did with the photographers?
Yes.
They stayed in my yard one time in their van.
Yeah, and they did that all over North America.
Yeah.
They did this
Yeah.
also in Durham.
Yeah, they sold their house.
Yeah, and they were traveling for two years. And this was featured in National Geographic.
In their names.
Their names of the photographer?
Yeah.
The Charnoff.
Yeah, the Charnoffs. Yeah.
So the two, the Charnoff, it was a couple of photographers, and then Ernie was going with them, and they went truly throughout North America taking these amazing pictures.
They got into it accidentally because her father, I believe, was a photographer at University of California at Berkeley.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so she had all these photographs that she tried to get identified, and she tried to get John Taylor to help her, and she ended up taking a course.
I see.
Yeah, and then they started out taking all these pictures.
That's true. The Charnoffs are from California.
Berkeley.
Yes. Yeah.
Berkeley. They went to high school in Berkeley.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's true. I
Interesting.
remember.
So they got in with Ernie Brodo to make this book.
This book, and which was an adventure because it was 2 years on the road with this camper that you've seen, and they were really taking these, and these pictures were not digital, right? It was Kodachrome, and there were slides, and I remember also they would stop, probably they did that with many people, and showing the pictures of specific species.
Yeah, and the draw in Baton Rouge was Shirley Tucker.
Yeah, yes.
Because she was working on lichens as well as her plant development.
And that was also part of their project, right? So they knew where the lichenologists and the mycologists were so that they could also stop and then kind of know the local expert helping them finding the material they wanted.
It was an effective way to do it.
Well, because they wanted at this point for the first edition of that book was to make sure that the most common lichens all across North America, which is vast territory, make sure they were not missing the most common ones.
Yeah.
And so the local lichenologists would know that, and so they were helping them and also know where to go.
Yeah.
And so it was really quite an experience. And just a fun note about Ernie Brodo is that I saw him recently. Oh. And so just before this field trip this summer to the Arctic, we had to go through Ottawa, and we stopped, and Ernie invited us to his place with Fania and invited other lichenologists. You know, we celebrated the 80th birthday of Ernie Brodo more than 8 years ago. And can you imagine? I mean, it's still hard for us, you know, to invite a large group of people home and having these, you know, nice dinners. And here they are, still doing this. I couldn't believe it. And Ernie was still, I met him at the museum, still working on these keys and at the genus level for lichens of North America. So it's truly amazing.
And I should say, I think you have nice parties, even though you're younger. But, anyway.
But it's a lot of work, and so to see someone, you know, so it's like I hope I will be that healthy at that age. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
So, you have gone then to Duke after?
So then when I finished my bachelor degree, then I asked if I could go for a master's degree because it's Canada. So usually at that time, a master's before doing the PhD. Okay. And again, Miroslav Grantner said, sure, you can do it. So I did it part-time at one point, but finally I was able to go completely. So I lived in Aylmer near Ottawa for 2 years.
And where's your degree from?
And I got from the University of Ottawa.
Oh, okay.
So that was the University of Ottawa and the museum, the Canadian Museum of Nature had this connection, and so that's how I was able to do my PhD with Ernie. But I was most of the time,
Your master's.
My master's with Ernie Brodo, and I could do it. I was all the time. My office was at the museum with Ernie, but my degree was from Ottawa, University of Ottawa. And so I did that for 2 years, but I was not able to finish. So I finished. I had to go back to my job because that was the agreement, and I finished while I was still working. So it took me a bit longer, 3 years. And the agreement was when I come back, I have to stay at least 1 year. I couldn't go further because it was kind of clear that I was probably going for a PhD. And that's when I applied to Duke and other universities and ended up to start. And I was still a technician in my first year at Duke I was still hired now, so there's a strong union, and they couldn't fire me, and but they were kindly asking, really, we know this is a long, the PhD is a long period of time. Would you consider, so that this way we can hire someone else? And so I said, well, give me 1 year, and then I will tell you. And so that was the end of my kind of job at Université Laval. And then I did my PhD with Ritus Vilgelis for 5 years, actually, 5 years.
And you left briefly after that?
After that, yes. So then, while I was very fortunate. When I was still a PhD student, I got an offer for the Film Museum immediately, and so I had to actually accelerate the end of my PhD and finalize my dissertation for that. But I asked the Film Museum if I could have 1 year postdoc. And they said yes. I wanted 2 years, but they said no, so we went for 1 year. So I ended up at the University of Indiana and with Mimi Zolan and Jeff Palmer. And so I went there for 1 year, postdoc, and then I went to Chicago and started my career there for 4 years and a half. And so then when this job at Duke University opened in a very important time for Duke University in terms of botany and zoology, because when I did my PhD, it was still in the Department of Botany, and I did this also. I was part of the UPG program, the university program in genetics. So my degree was in the Department of Botany, but with this genetics concentration. And so, but when I came back in 2001, when they were advertising those positions, it was at a time when the university decided to fuse botany and zoology. And so I think these jobs were negotiated as part of this fusion.
Oh, okay.
And so that's how I was fortunate to get the offer and return to Duke, which with the beginning of the Department of Biology, which was a fusion of botany and zoology. And I've been there since then, yeah.
So how many years is that?
So that's a long time, yeah. 2001, so 30.
Wow, that long.
33 years.
Because you were still a student, so that's how long ago I was there at Duke.
Exactly. So when I started, when I was a student, that was 1990 to 1995.
Oh my gosh.
So you probably have come maybe 1992 or 1993, maybe?
It was right after I was MSA president, because it was my presidential address.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that was... I don't remember. I don't remember what year.
Probably that first half of the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time
Another
flies.
interesting thing
Time
that
flies.
happened, though, I remember you invited me for the IMC in Vancouver.
Right.
And that was my first, presentation in a, really large.
Yeah, that was a symposium Junta Sugiyama.
Yeah.
And I had organized, yeah.
That was amazing. Do you remember how many people there was in that room?
Oh, it was a wonderful meeting.
Yes.
It was, I met so many people there.
It was one of the best experiences ever I had, and it was so well attended, and it was such a beautiful setting because of Vancouver.
And it's the only time that the Mycological Congress has had a real scientific publication, because they published 2 supplemental volumes to the Canadian Journal of Botany.
Yeah.
I remember those big, thick things.
Yep.
And
that was a lot of work.
Those were lots of information. And I kept them till I got rid of my lab when I retired, but you couldn't find them very often, but they were full of information.
Yep. And
had a very good time to be able to cite because of the changes in the molecular work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the theme of that symposium that you organized was this: how can we reconciled morphology-driven systematics with molecular systematics, because that
was an important question at the time.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
and at breakfast this morning, some of us were talking about it's hard to understand that anyone thought we shouldn't use molecular characters ever, that there was ever a discussion. Anyway, that was a long time ago.
But I remember that symposium, the room was huge, but it was full. People were sitting in the stairs on both sides, and there was like packed at the back because it was such a hot topic at that time.
Yeah. So anyway, we talked a lot then about your career and everything, and not a lot about the specifics of your research, but you've used molecular characters.
Well, the thing is, what attracted me to the Vilgelis lab for the PhD was this molecular phylogenetic revolution that was happening. And to me, that was clear because during my master's, I was trying to do this, but it was not easy in those days. And I did isozyme, actually. So when I was using isozyme, you probably remember those days when
that was pre-DNA.
Pre-DNA. So I did, isozyme work. I'm the only lichenologist who ever did that on lichens, and I could see the power of this. But we knew DNA was coming through. We were about to be able to use this. PCR was about to emerge, and so I really wanted to do this. And so and there was not many labs that were doing this at the time. There was Berkeley, of course, with John Taylor, Tom Bruns, but there was also Ritis, Vilgelis. And so I was fortunate enough to go there, and that's what really was my passion, and not only the technology for sequencing, but also the revolution in terms of analyses, being able to do this phylogenetic work. It was very exciting to be at Duke and having all this exposure, to people like Dave Swafford and others that were coming.
And I always try to say not only DNA but the analysis methods.
Well, that's the thing, because the technologies, as we see still now, is the technology to generate the data is always preceding our ability to analyze it. And there's always this excitement about getting the data, but then there's always a bottleneck after this, because the bioinformatics to deal with, and it's still like this. So I was very interested by that part. And a big thing that happened during my PhD when I was with Ritis is that because before automated sequencing, it was a tedious process to generate.
That's the way I learned.
Well, and we're all familiar with these isotopes and all that work.
And the glass broke when it got too hot.
Separating those glass plates, and it was a process. And so suddenly, I had the fortune to be able to go to the Smithsonian. I think I was in my third year or beginning fourth. And to be able, because they just bought the first ABI.
Was Paula already?
Yeah,
Paula
the priest was already there. Andrea was also there, Gargas, working with her. And that was the first ABI machine, sequencing machine that I heard that they had one. So people there invited us to go. We had this opportunity, so we went. And Paul Lewis was there too, and Louise Lewis was there too, and so it was nice to. And Dave Swafford was working at the Smithsonian at the time, so it was a perfect, And I stayed there for several months, and having access directly to this sequencer, and I generated all the data for my thesis through those, 6 months.
A short period of time.
Yeah, it was perfect, and it was also interesting because even locally, people were still not sure how to use the format of the data, that you were getting from these machines because it was so new. And I remember testing different software, to deal with this, and it was really exciting times. And then when I returned to Duke, I told Ritis we need this machine because we had already a Lycor. I don't know if you remember Lycor.
Yeah, I remember Lycor.
And so they had just, they were testing a Lycor, and we had the Lycor setting in the lab, actually. And I told Ritis, I said, no, this is not the way. You should return the Lycor, and we should buy an ABI. So, and that's what happened, and it was really transformative.
Yeah, we made a purchase of a Lycor at LSU quite early, but
Well, there were advantages with the Lycor
Yeah.
because the reeds were very long, and so it was 1 kb, and so that was attractive, and it was still the use, the bands, right? So we were used to this. It was kind of a, but then with Lycor, I could see, I mean, with the ABI, I could see this was maybe shorter, but it was so much more powerful.
yeah.
So there was no return after that. So.
So you've had a very nice career at Duke.
Duke was amazing. It's and they renovated all the lab space, and so I'm just a few. What I like about the setting there for my job is that I have the herbarium right. The lichen collection is right beside my molecular lab, and all the microscopy is there.
And it's a very nice, large lichen collection.
It's one of the best, and in the United States, and because of the Culbersons.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very fortunate to overlap with them even when I started my career. Both Bill Culberson and Chiquita were there, and so it was nice to be able to continue this. And they were having them there still as I was taking over for the future, and so that setting was so good because I always feel and still feel even more strongly that the best training systematics we can offer for the next generation of systematists is to have a collection there and the molecular lab and also do the field work, right? So all this connected, fully integrated with access to the cutting edge technology, and that combination, and including computer clusters and all that. And so to have that all there was so good.
Well, it's been really nice to review your career and learn some things I didn't know about you, because I had no idea your entrance into strict mycology had been that long. But that's really good to hear, that people can do this after a few years of something else. Is there anything else we've left out that you want to say?
No, that sounds good. Thank you so much.
Anyway, thank you so much for doing this.